Hey everyone, this is Nitreg from nitreg.com, and today I'm going to be talking about advantages. I think this is probably one of the fundamental things that you guys need to know when considering playing hands. It's a very important concept, and I see a lot of people that try to understand the game, but it becomes very difficult for them, and it's simply because they don't understand a few basic concepts. Now, these concepts are very easy to understand and learn, but they're very hard to implement. So I'm going to have a two-part video here, where the first part is going to be showing you kind of the theory behind everything, and then the second part is going to show you a lot of hand examples. And this gets way into depth, and you should be thinking about these things on literally every single hand you play. But obviously, we can't go over every single scenario of hand that gets played. So, I hope to give you guys the theory and a couple examples, and hopefully, you guys can apply this in your own game and in the own hands that you analyze and play. Alright, so let me go ahead and get started. Why do we need to exploit advantages? If we think about it, can't we just wait for pocket aces every time and shove all in preflop? Like, if you think about it, why, what is an advantage? An advantage means that you have some sort of ability over your opponent where you can get money. So, the ultimate way where we won't be able to get exploited, but we could exploit others, is just by playing literally aces every single hand and then just shoving all in every single hand. Because if they call, they're behind every single time, or they'll chop with us if they have aces themselves. We could play very robotically and just wait for aces and shove all in. But that can't happen, and the reason why is because we have blinds. Blinds force us to put in money without aces. We'll be in the big blind or small blind, and in a nine-handed game, like a four-ring game, every two times out of every nine hands, you're gonna have money in the pot that you put in the pot, and you're not gonna have aces. You're gonna have aces once every like 200 and something times. So you're putting in a lot of money without aces. So that's why we can't just wait for aces. That seems pretty obvious. On top of that, of course, there's rake. Most places pay rake if you win a hand, which isn't that big of a deal if you're getting in aces against weaker hands every single time. But some casinos take rake based on a hourly wage. So, if you sit down for like 15, 30 minutes or whatever, you have to pay a certain amount of money. That might be a factor as well. But essentially, just realize that we can't play super unexploitably by playing aces and just wait, to have this amazing advantage against everyone. And poker would be very boring if everyone just played aces. So that's why they have blinds. So since the blinds force everyone to play more than the nuts, we need to figure out ways to exploit hands that aren't the nuts. And that's essentially what we're going to be talking about here. People are going to be playing more hands than just the nuts. So when that happens, they are opening themselves up for opportunities where they can get owned. So it's our job to figure out the best ways to own our opponents, and a lot of them come through all these advantages that I'm going to be talking about. So we need to maximize situations where we have an advantage and minimize situations where we don't have an advantage. That is how we make money in poker. That is literally how you make money in poker. You get money in spots where you have advantages, and if your opponent has an advantage on you, we want to minimize that as much as possible so we don't lose all the money that we just made from the fish. Seems fairly obvious, so let's move on. So what are the advantages? Well, the advantages are positional advantage, card advantage, and skill advantage. Now, there's three advantages, and you guys can all see them, but I see a lot of people taking these advantages and kind of weighing them, differently. Some people might think that skill advantage is a huge thing, like, I could play any two cards against this guy because, I'm super machismo and I'm the best, I can outplay people. There's people like that. There's people that say, card advantage is the best, so I'll just wait for aces every single hand or kings every single hand, which just isn't the case, necessarily. And there's some people that think position is a good advantage. They'll just say, I'll play any card in position. I can. It kind of goes with like outplaying people. People understand position, but they don't fully understand it. So I kind of made a little graph. It's kind of just like arbitrary numbers, but I think it's more in line with how you should weigh these advantages in your head. By far, the most important advantage is positional advantage. That's in the blue. Um, I weight that as 70% of the advantages that you should exploit, and then 25% is card advantage, and then only 5% is skill advantage. I this is just my opinion. There's obviously no science or math behind this, but just out of my experience of millions of hands that I played, this is kind of how I view it. And feel free to disagree with me. Post in the comments if you feel that I'm wrong. I could definitely be wrong. I think that I assume that I'm wrong if this was a scientific. If there's a way to scientifically calculate this, I assume that my numbers will be slightly off, but I don't think that they're going to be that far off of what it would actually be if it was scientific. So I guess this is one of those things that I can't really prove. You guys can prove it to yourself more or less in the long run, but one of those things that probably take my word for it, or ask some other players who you trust are really good winning players, and ask them what they think the distribution should be for this. But I think more or less if you stick with this thought process for your advantages, then you probably won't be going wrong. So let's move on. So positional advantage, as I said, is by far the most important. This is exactly why we open 7% under the gun and 40% on the button. So it's going to greatly influence the distribution of hands that we play, and it's very important, like I just mentioned. So we want to raise in position for value against weaker opponents, and we want to minimize the amount of regs who are in position on us. So obviously, we're going to be doing a lot of ISO raising against weaker players. Just we don't have to have that good of a hand. We could play a lot of positions, a lot of hands in position. It's fairly easy to play against players who just limp and fold, or limp and call, and then check fold the flop. But at the same time, if we're out of position, like let's say a really good player is on our left, or even a player who's decent, they're just like some reg that's plays tight aggressive, it's going to be very hard to play out of position against them. You're not going to win too much money off of them. I'll just tell you that up front. You're not going to make too much money off of them. They're going to play fairly straightforward in position. They're going to give you some hard times here and there. And when you have a good hand, they're going to identify that fairly easily and not pay you off that well unless you cooler them. So the reason why position is so important is because we get the most information on the table. We get to put in extra streets of value, and we get extra information, which allows us to fold. So if you think about it, pre-flop, other than the blinds, you're going to be the last person to act, which is really nice. You get to see what other people do in front of you. You get to see who's limping, who's raising, who's folding. You have all this information at your disposal. Like, let's say you have pocket sevens under the gun. Well, should I open it? Should I fold it? Should I call? It's hard to figure out because you don't know what all these people behind you are going to do. If you're at a 4-ring table, there's 8 other people who are left to act, and for all you know, they're going to have aces, or they might all have deuce 7 offsuit and hands like that and just fold. You don't really know what's going on, so it's really hard to play out of position pre-flop. So when you're in position, it's really easy because you can see, like, oh, everyone folded. Now there's just 2 people left in the blinds, so I'll just go ahead and raise it and steal their blinds. Or, oh, someone limped. I can go ahead and open a wide range for value. Or, oh, someone, raised under the gun and then got 3-bet in middle position, and now I'm sitting here with pocket sixes. I'm just going to fold this. Like, it makes it very easy to play your hands because you get all this free information before it's your turn to act. And post-flop, it's the same exact thing. You get to see what people do. If people are like leading into you and re-raising and stuff, you can fold fairly strong hands. Also, you can see what other people do by like betting. And depending on how they react, you can do all sorts of things. Like you can float people, you can put in thin value bets, you can regulate the pot size by like checking back. You can do all sorts of things. So it's very advantageous to be in position. The second type of advantage is card advantage. So since position is so important, we need to compensate out of position with much stronger hands. So obviously if people can play very, very well in position against you, the only way we can really combat them back is just by having a tighter range. If we have a tighter range, it doesn't really matter how good they are in position necessarily. because we're just going to be showing down really strong hands all the time. So let's say hypothetically, out of position, we're only going to be playing with pocket aces. Well, they'll have really good information on us, but they might have the ability to be able to try to bluff at us and see what we do. But if we have like the nuts every single hand, then it doesn't matter how much position they have. We're always going to show down with the best hand. Well, obviously we're not going to only have the nuts every single hand, but you can kind of get the concept. If you have a much tighter range, there's going to be much less weak hands that you have where you just check fold or raise and then fold, and there's less folding going on. If you have stronger hands, you're going to have more spots where you can confidently either re-raise or call down, and more or less be ahead of a villain with a much wider range who's in position on you. Also, it makes your life a lot easier as you won't be having to play all these marginal hands out of position against players, which really sucks, especially if you start owning yourself, where you're value betting, yourself against the opponent's stronger range, stuff like that. You don't want to get in those situations, so play tighter out of position. When in position, card advantage isn't as important because we can get thinner value and we can bluff in a lot of spots. This is something that I already kind of covered, but obviously when you're in position, you can increase your range. You don't have to be such a nit like you are out of position, because when you're in position, you can do a lot more things than just simply make hands and then try to get value from them. So if you have thinner value hands, you can get value that way, or if there's spots where you can bluff, you can go ahead and bluff. It makes things a lot easier. You have many more tools at your disposal, so you don't have to necessarily stick with just nutted hands. So basically, David Sklansky, he says that we need stronger hands to play against our opponents. So, like, his fundamental theorem of poker is that, theoretically, if both players' cards were up, we should literally play whether our hand is better than our opponent's. So, if you think about card advantage this way, you should kind of think about it this way, where if you know that you have a stronger hand than your other player's hand, then you should play it accordingly. Like, you should raise, or you should call or whatever. But it's not quite that simple because we can't see our opponent's hand. So I think a more accurate description of a card advantage would go along with Phil Galfond and his concept of Phil Galfond dollars. Because Phil Galfond says we need stronger hand ranges to play against our opponents. So let's say that my range is 7% of starting hands, the top 7%, and I know my opponent has the top 40% of his hands. Well, I know that the top 7% is much stronger than the top 40%, so I can more confidently play those hands for value and put a lot of money in. So David Sklansky gets it partially right, but of course we can't figure out each other's hands, and we can't possibly just put our opponent on one single hand. So we literally just have to guess, not necessarily guess, but have an educated guess on what their range is, and play it according to our hand. Or if you're in position, there's more advanced concepts where you can calculate your perceived range according to your opponent's range. But that gets into more complex matters involved with a lot of like bluffing and trying to outlevel your opponents and stuff like that. But generally for the micro stakes, we're playing against players who are only thinking about their hands. So what we need to think about is very second level poker of how does my hand compare to my villain's hand range? And that's pretty much most of what you need to think about the micro stakes in terms of card advantage. So skill advantage. Skill advantage is really not all that important. Most people grossly overvalue this advantage. You see it a lot where people are like, well, I'm going to call 3-bet out of position with a low suited connector because I feel like I'm better than this player. Okay, well, yeah, you might be much better than this player. You might be winning poker at like 5 big blinds per 100, and this guy might be losing at 40 big blinds per 100, but that doesn't necessarily mean that that's a right play. We're going to use skill advantage mostly when we're on borderline spots or if we have a big note on the villain. So let's say we're on a borderline spot where we think it's going to be very high variance, playing, whatever hand. So let's just say we raise with, let's say that under the gun, raising with pocket sevens is literally a break even play at full ring. Let's say that we break even with pocket sevens. Um, so we're not really sure exactly whether we should raise it or fold it because either way we're just breaking even in the long run. Well, if there's a bunch of really good aggressive players to your left, you should probably fold pocket sevens because that's a really borderline spot, and if they're if they have that skill advantage against you and a positional advantage, sevens is probably going to turn into a negative EV hand where you actually lose money in the long run. But let's say everyone behind you is a giant nit, and in the big blind there's one big massive fish who's like a 92/4 or something, and you can go ahead and open up sevens because you know that your positional advantage isn't that great pre-flop, but your skill advantage is amazing against this one player who you're probably going to get a heads up with more times than not. So, it's one of those things that kind of pushes you in one direction or another in a borderline spot. Also, if we have a big note on a villain, this could be a really big thing. So, for example, the other day against a regular player, I kind of noticed that he played incredibly fit or fold post flop. If he hit a hand, he would c bet, and if he didn't, he would just check fold or check call and then check fold the turn. And this guy was incredibly exploitable. So I wrote down that note on him, and literally I would be calling probably like 40% plus of his pre-flop raises when he was in position. So I knew his hand range was pretty wide, and I would literally just bet when he checked to me, and I would literally just fold if he bet into me, unless of course I had a really strong hand. So it was very exploitable, or I was able to play a style against him which exploited the heck out of him. So obviously that would be a skill advantage for me because I'm able to like quote unquote outplay him. So I think that's a spot where you can play an incredibly wide range against someone. That it's very rare that you're going to find something that blatant with a villain. But that was definitely a situation where it's applicable. Remember, even the worst of players can outplay us if they have position and good cards. So, like, obviously, if someone, if you're playing against a fish who like never folds, you can't just call with any two cards in position and try to like raise them and outplay them. And you see this a lot where people are like, oh, I'm ripping the nuts. Why can't he fold? Well, he's a big fish and he doesn't like folding. So don't try to outplay people. Like your skill advantage is only good if you know how to apply it right. So obviously if the guy plays a really wide range, he should play straight up value hands and shouldn't be trying to bluff people. So this whole concept of outplaying people is kind of goofy in a lot of spots. You can't really outplay non-thinking players or thinking players with strong hands. I don't know why the extra P is in there, so ignore that. So yeah, like I was saying, people try to outplay non-thinking players who are just thinking about their hands. It's kind of stupid. Like if there's like a 4 straight on the board and the guy never folds and you raise to try to bluff him off of like 2 pair or a set, you're going to be very disappointed because he's going to call most of the time. So don't try to like think that you're in position and you have an amazing skill advantage on this guy, and you're gonna make him fold. Like it's just not gonna happen. Also, like let's say you're playing against a nit who plays with like aces and kings, and then you decide that you're going to try to outplay him and represent a set or something. Well, the guy has a really strong hand and he's been waiting for hours for his aces and he finally got it. Like do you really think he's going to fold? No. So really skill advantage is one of those things that you really shouldn't take. You should take it with a grain of salt. Like it's not that big of a deal. Think of it more as icing on the cake for your other advantages. Like what I was saying before. If you have like pocket sevens under the gun, it's borderline. Or you're in position and you have a note against someone, you can exploit them. Really kind of take that into consideration as icing on the cake for either card advantage or positional advantage. And I guess just as kind of like a side note, I want to point out that you're not really just going to play a hand because of one of these advantage. It's always going to be a mixture of all 3 of these. That pie chart that I showed you guys earlier, that's kind of like a general way we should think about all these things. But given hand to hand, we should have different mixtures of what advantage we're trying to exploit and what advantage actually goes against us. So that's just something to think about, and it's really hard to like talk about generically, but it becomes clear when we go over hand histories. As every single hand history will have some sort of advantage that we're trying to exploit, and we can go ahead and show that to you, and it becomes very obvious when we go hand to hand. And hopefully, when we start doing that, you guys can kind of make sense of it more and start applying it to your own game. Alright, so now I want to give you guys some context of how we can apply these advantages. A lot of these hands might become kind of repetitive, which is going to be a little boring, so stick with me. But I promise you it's going to be good for you because it'll help ingrain in your head what we're looking for in hands, where a lot of your winning hands will come from, what how you should be playing, etc., etc. I just want to let you guys know that I think every single one of these hands are hands where I ended up winning. And I kind of did that for a reason, and the reason is because I want you guys to see what types of hands we win with, and how we win the hands, like what type of advantages we're taking advantage of. So go ahead and follow with me, and we'll go through a couple of these hands. So in this hand, I go ahead and race with Ace Jack of Diamonds. This is a spot where I have positional advantage and card advantage and skill advantage. As you guys can see, the player in the small blind is an 84-28. 84-38. The guy in the big blind is a 62-10. So when people are playing like 60 to 85% of their hands, Ace Jack suited is going to be the nuts essentially. And I have position on them, which is amazing, and I have a skill advantage. Just the fact that they're playing this wide of a range, I know that I'm going to be a better player than them in terms of me making more money off of them. So I'll go ahead and raise. That seems very obvious, but it's important to think about the advantages. We're starting out with easy hands, but it's always good to know in a very clear and concise way what you're doing and exactly why you're doing it. So obviously, it's going to be a big hand. I just c-bet in position, and he raises, and the hand goes on from here. But as you can see, it's very easy to play hands when you're in position. If you're playing a hand in position that's very strong against people who are very weak, then you can play very well in position with a strong hand range by flopping hands and value betting. And then when they do stuff like check raise, you can go ahead and figure out what you're going to do. Like he check raises 24%, so this is going to be a lot easier spot in position than out of position, because I feel like I have more plays at my disposal when I'm in position. So I ended up winning this hand. So this is a spot where we have all three advantages, and it makes a very interesting hand where we're getting raised and stuff, and it makes it very easy, I think. So the next hand is Ace Queen of Clubs, and the under the gun / cutoff guy in a four-handed game goes ahead and opens it 4 times the big blind. Now this guy is pretty loose. He has a very wide range. He 3-bets a ton. He doesn't fold the 3-bets that often, and he shows down. His what's a showdown percentage is 40%, which is really high. I'm out of position, so I don't have a positional advantage, but I do have a card advantage. My hand is very strong. Ace Queen, I think, is in the top like 4% of hands or something like that, or maybe 5%, somewhere in there. So against a guy who's stealing 39%, we can actually see exactly. Cutoff is 36%. Against 36% of hand range, my top 5% hand is going to be able to crush a lot of his range. I'm not sure why that disappeared. Let me go ahead and redo this. So I have no positional advantage, but I do have card advantage, and against this short stack guy who called, I have a skill advantage. It doesn't really make a difference against him, because he doesn't have any money, so there's no places where I could like bluff him and stuff, but it's just worth mentioning, I guess. We're talking about advantage, so it's very easy to raise here, and he goes ahead and calls, and the short stack calls all in. I hit top pair, and it just goes on from there. I win the hand. So the next hand, pocket twos, goes fold, fold, and the small blind limps. So now here I have a positional advantage, as I'm in position every single street, including pre-flop. I have a card advantage, I assume, because my hand is a made hand. It's already a pair. Most likely he's gonna have just two unpaired cards, which isn't that bad. He's gonna be flipping against me, but technically I do have a hand advantage. So my card advantage isn't really that big. But I have positional advantage and I have skill advantage. He's a 57-11, so I assume he's not going to be that good of a player. So this to me seems like a very clear raise. Um, if I hit a deuce, it's gonna be awesome. I'll try to value town him. If not, I'll try to bluff him. And a lot of times, I think he'll just fold pre-flop. So it's very clear fold or very clear raise for me. So he goes ahead and donks out pot, and I raise it, and he ends up calling, and I end up getting all of his money. So that's a good hand. Um, so deuce four suited here. Guy goes ahead and pots it under the gun, gets a call from a fish. I go ahead and decide to three bet. Um, at the time, I didn't have that many stats on this guy, but this guy looked like he was fairly loose and folds quite a bit. Right now, I have him as folding to three bets only 14%, so 1 out of 7 times. Given that, I wouldn't have three bet pre-flop, but what I knew at the time was that I'd seen him fold a three bet, fold to a decent one three bet out of like maybe two hands. So I knew that he was capable of folding, and I knew that he had a wide range as well. So I think that this is an okay hand to three bet. Now, why did I three bet here? Well, we have positional advantage, which is really good. I feel like we have skill advantage. We'll be able to be in position and be able to outplay him to some degree. It's not that big of a skill advantage. He's not like a massive fish, but he's I feel that he's exploitable to some degree. And we don't have card advantage. Obviously, we have four high. Pretty much any hand beats us. So it should be very obvious to you guys that I'm not playing this hand at all for card advantage. Like my hand has zero card advantage. It's literally just a play that is exploiting my position and exploiting the fact that that they're just gonna fold a lot. At least in my head at the time, because I was looking at stats that weren't over very large sample size. So they I end up getting cold called in position, which is kind of hilarious. Get cold called again in the blinds. The original raiser calls and the other guy calls. So obviously not the spot you want to see when you have four high. Lucky for me, I run like nit reg and hit trips on the flop, and hand plays out. I end up winning a lot of money on this hand because no one ever puts me on having a deuce. So this is one of those hands. It ended up not going well for me pre-flop, but post-flop I ended up hitting gin, which was awesome. It's not gonna happen that often, but when it came to my first decision of whether I should fold, call, or raise, I was in a very good spot to take advantage of position here. Once I raise and everyone calls, it really sucks for me, but it's okay because I get to see what everyone does, and if I hit trip deuces, no one is able to put me on a deuce, and I win all their money. And if I don't hit anything, then if I even hit like bottom pair or something, I can just confidently fold and give up. Like it's no big deal at all. So I think that this is a good hand to show you that you don't always need card advantage if you really maximize your positional and skill advantage. Jack 9 suited. It's kind of similar concept. This guy limps. He's an 80/10, so he's limping 80% of his range. I think Jack 9 suited is technically going to be ahead. It might be, no matter where it is, whether it's ahead or behind, it's going to be slightly ahead or slightly behind of a guy that has 80% of the range. I feel that if he would raise the top 10% of his range, then Jack 9 suited is probably ahead, because I guess like probably like tens through aces and ace king he's raising somewhere in there. So I feel like a lot of his strong hands would be raising, so it's okay for me to go ahead and raise Jack 9 suited. So card advantage, I don't really have one. if I do have a card advantage, it's really small. But I do have positional advantage and I do have skill advantage. My intentions are to either have him fold pre-flop or to have him fold in the flop. He folds 77% to 3-bets over 50 hands so far. So that's kind of what I'm exploiting here. Um, that being said, I'm actually doing a hand history, or I'm sorry, I'm actually doing a series that goes over hand ranges right now, and I'm analyzing my own hand ranges. And this might actually be a spot where I shouldn't isolate for value, but I just figured I'd throw this hand into the mix because it can show you how strong position is. Like position is so strong that I could raise with a hand like Jack Nine suited and be able to play it fairly easily. Um, get it in and have a straight flush draw and bink like a champ. Ace 10 offsuit, go ahead and raise, get 3-bet. This guy over 25 hands is a 74-70 with a 3-bet percentage of 78%. Against him, Ace 10 offsuit's the nuts. Like, normally Ace 10 offsuit is a very sucky hand in a re-raise pot, but against a guy who is going to have 78% of his range, it's essentially the nuts. Like, I don't really know if I can, like, 4-bet and get it all in and have it be good, but I definitely know that it's against his 3-betting range. So I decided flat because I have position. I can, see what he does post flop with his ridiculously wide range and make his life hell. Also, I have a card advantage, so if I hit an ace or a 10, I'm not planning on going anywhere. I'm literally just going to call him down if I hit top pair. Just because he's going to be owning himself so many times. So I'll go ahead and call, and I hit top pair, and he pots, I call. The turn kind of sucks, but he overbet shoves, and it's a very easy call for me, just because his range is so wide. Like, you can't just put him on, like, flush draws or 2-pair or anything goofy like that. That would be kind of ridiculous. And he's going to have so many hands that are, like, pair plus flush draw or, open and straight draw or whatever. So, especially since I have the backdoor clubs, and, top pair, really good kicker relative to this guy's range, it's just a very easy call, and I call. I think 2-pair, but it doesn't really matter. He practically has air. He has 3rd pair, or I guess 4th pair on the river. So this is a really good spot where positional and card advantage just really help me when I'm not the pre-flop aggressor. He goes ahead and just value owns himself, and I'm able to just play it perfectly in position. If I was out of position, this would be a really bad spot in a lot of ways, because he could play very face up. Like, he could bet, and if I call, he could bet again on the turn, and if I call, he might just like give up on the river. He has showdown value. Since he's out of position, he's kind of scared and doesn't really know how to play, so he's just going to do goofy things like, bet, and then when he hits a pair on the turn, just jam it all in and like just completely spaz out. So I feel like I get a really good position against him. Let's go on here. So threes, I go ahead and open, call, call, call. This is one of those spots where I don't really need to have that strong of a hand because I'm in a stealing spot. Since a lot of the, threes is an okay hand. It's already a made hand, but I'm not really playing for threes to showdown. I'm playing more to hit like sets or just steal the pot. So I think that's a good reason to open. And this is a very good example of why having position is good. I'm in position against everyone except for one person, and the board is very dry. So this is a spot where you don't need a hand. You don't really need a card advantage necessarily. You just need to have position and see that everyone checks and then bet and then take down the pot a lot. And it's very routine to bet here, even 4-way. I get 2 calls, so I'm completely giving up here unless I bink the nuts, which I do, like a champ. So this guy pots, I call. The other guy goes all in for a call. The river bricks off, and this guy essentially ships, and I cooler 2 people. So this is why playing in position is so good, because out of position, there's no way I see this turn ever. Someone's gonna bet, and with their draw or whatever. When I'm in position, I'm able to take free cards. I'm able to bet as a essentially a bluff, but I have 2 outs to the nuts. It's just a really good spot for me. Like, if the turn isn't a 3, I can just see that there's 2 callers and just check it down, or try to if I hit a 3 on the river, I can obviously bet. But it's very easy to play when you're in position. You could just take stabs at the pot and then give up, or you can take stabs at the pot and barrel or whatever like the situation is. It's very easy because you're in position. I shouldn't say that it's easy. It's just a lot easier when you're in position. If you're out of position, let's say some guy c bets in position and you're left to act. I mean, R3 is ahead in this flop. I don't know. It's very hard to play. So that's why we fold threes pre-flop when we're out of position. But in position, we can play it all day because we can either steal it pre-flop on the flop, we can take it away on the turn, we can pick up the nuts on the turn, whatever. Like we can just own people all day. Here's another great example of how position is awesome. I go ahead and raise. I've got essentially just positional advantage against, the guy on the button seems fairly solid. The two players in the blinds are complete fish, so positional advantage is pretty much why I raise. I'm probably going to have some card advantage because they're playing like 40 something percent of their hands. So ace four is probably going to be slightly ahead of their range in a lot of times, but post flop it's not going to be that good unless I hit like two pair or a flush or trips or something like that. Just because if they hit like an ace, they're probably going to be ahead of me. So it's one of those hands where I just play for position most of the time. Like my hand's probably best when you think in terms of like Sklansky's theory of poker or Galfon's theory of poker. But at the same time, I'm not really looking to hit like an ace and get three straights of value necessarily. So it's just pretty much a positional play with some value to it. I hit the nuts because I'm awesome like that, and this guy goes ahead and dunks out. I just call. This is the great thing about position is like players have no idea how to play against you. They have absolutely no idea how to play against you, and so they can just completely own themselves. Like they don't really know what to do. Like the last guy that we saw just completely spazzed out when he hit third pair on the turn and shipped all in that 3-bet pot when I had ace 10. It's very hard for players to play out of position, and so if I raise here, I might be able to push him out because I have the ace of diamonds, so it's not like he's going to be peeling that wide. It's just one of those spots where he's going to get in a really bad spot, and that's where people make mistakes. So my hand isn't really vulnerable, so I'm just going to let him own himself. He's bombing down for me, so there's I feel like I can get all the money in. So I decided to call here as well. And then the river, I was going to go for the all-in shove, and he ends up checking to me instead, so it looked kind of like pot control. So I just decided to overbet the pot, and since the diamond bricked off, I really think that he's just going to... I think he's in check call mode, and I don't think he's going to fold here, given that the obvious draw is missed. So he goes ahead and calls, and I read him correctly. So that's why advantage or positional advantage is so good. Like I get to see what he does, and I get to play off of him. Since he was barreling down big, like I was pretty sure that he had a strong hand or a fairly strong draw, so I can just let him own himself and then get all of his money that way. Also if I had a draw as well, like let's say I had ace jack with ace of diamonds, I could have played it very face up, and then on the river I could just check back, where he could easily get value with his top pair. I could just show it down, or if I hit a diamond, I could bet it for value. Or let's say I'm out of position, it's gonna suck for me if I don't have the nut flush, or even if I do have the nut flush, if I don't have the nut flush, I could be c betting and then not sure where I'm at. When he calls with his top pair, like is he just calling with like a pair plus flush draw or something like that, or does he actually have top pair? It's very hard to play out of position. At the same time, if I have like the nut flush like I do, and I'm out of position, then if I'm just like bombing down the pot, is he going to really call through streets? He might. This guy probably would, but what happens when a jack rolls off? What happens when another diamond rolls off? It's very hard to know, and it really sucks. Because you don't really get to control the size of the pot that much when you're out of position. When you're in position, you can control the size of the pot all day. Like what I did here, I overbet the river, and I did it because I knew he would call it off a lot of the times. So you can really manipulate a lot of the size of the pot in position, as well as get more money in the pot because you're in position and they don't know what to do, and they just kind of like bet down or check call down or whatever. So we have a few more hands left. I this is probably very obvious for a lot of you guys, but I just want to get you guys thinking in the mentality of positional advantage, card advantage, or skill advantage, and I hope that these are helping you guys out. I isolate with Ace Four offsuit here, just purely positional advantage. But here's one of the reasons why, like, we don't always have to have a strong hand. This guy in the small blind donks out. He donks 17% of the time, and all these guys are kind of like loose passive and just call. Now, if they had a strong hand here, if someone donks out like a quarter pot, they would probably just raise for value. But since they didn't, and this guy has such a wide donking range, I feel like with my 5 outs, I can go ahead and semi bluff raise, and I think that this is good because I'll get them to fold out quite a bit. Um, and it's really good for me. Like since I have positional advantage, I can just flat out tell that everyone has a really wide range and a really weak hand. The guy in the small blind has like all sorts of hands, and everyone else is going to have a really weak hand because they never raise. So I can confidently raise in position here, and it's just going to make everyone's lives hell because what are they going to do? Call it a position with like 10 jack here or something? It's excuse me. It's just like it's really hard to play out of position. So I know that, and I'm gonna do a lot of moves in position and semi bluff and stuff. So they all go ahead and fold, and I win a nice sized pot. And I don't really have a hand. I have like bottom pair, so that's awesome. Here's a spot, Ace Five offsuit. Against this guy, I don't have the positional advantage. I don't really have that much of skill advantage against him. Uh, I guess you can argue that I have some card advantage, just against his entire range of 100%. Like Ace Five offsuit's gonna be ahead. He also folds to steal 75%. So mostly this is just like a steal, just to win his cards. So I try to steal the Ace Five offsuit. I completely whiff the flop. I end up banking the turn. I end up winning this hand, but you can kind of see how important these advantages are. Like in this hand, when he calls, I have no card advantage. I have no positional advantage, and I arguably don't really have skill advantage. Like this guy doesn't seem too exploitable. Just looking at his stats, he doesn't really show down that much. Like he should show down like 25%, and he's at 20%, which is the only thing I can really tell. But that's not really that relevant in this hand. Other than that, like skill advantage is pretty much non-existent here. So, as you guys can see, like if you don't really have advantages, life is just going to completely suck. So, I can't really do anything. It's just kind of like check it down and hope that we check it down if he's passive. So we get into a spot where I end up hitting a pair, and I think he stabs it at once, and I call down, and my pair is good, or for that one street or whatever. But as you guys can see, it's just like really hard. I mean, all this guy has to do is just bet when I check and I fold, or he could bet on the turn and bet the river or whatever. Like, there's a lot of situations where he can just outplay me, not because he's like super good and better than me or anything, but just because he has positional advantage and card advantage. He's playing with the top 25% of his range, and he's in position. So it's very hard for me to play. And I hope you guys realize that your opponents are going to be in that same spot too, no matter how good they are. If they're out of position against a tight range, it's going to really suck for them. So abuse that against players. Play in position with strong hands, and it's going to suck for your opponents, even if they're good players. Winning players like such as players like myself, I guess. It even puts people like me in really hard spots where I'm out of position, and it's not that I don't know what to do. It's like my hand's very obvious. I just check fold. I don't have that strong of a hand. So King Two suited is another example of how awesome position is. Like King Two suited sucks in terms of hand strength. But given that it's heads up, and this guy has 100% range right now, King 2 suited is probably ahead, and also post flop I can probably outplay him in a sense that I can c-bet a lot and take it down multiple barrels. That's why I like it to be suited, because if I pick up flush draws and stuff, I can try to outplay him. So this guy goes ahead and donks. He donks 67% of the time. not going to give it too much respect. So I'm going to test him out here and just raise him up, and he folds. So this is just another testament to how powerful position is. Like, if I'm out of position, there's no way that I'm ever playing this hand, and also there's no way that I'm ever like check raising this board or anything goofy like that. When you're out of position, it sucks. People can like call you in position and float and do all sorts of stuff, and it really sucks. And even if they're not really good players, they can do that and like accidentally make your life really hard. But when you're in position, you can be very aggressive against players. You can do it with a very wide range. You can do all sorts of stuff, and you don't necessarily have to hit pairs. You can simply outplay them. Not because you're like so much better than them, but just because you're able to analyze all their decisions that they make before you. You get that extra piece of knowledge, and on top of that, you can read their skill level. This guy donks a lot. You can just know that he has a really wide range and play against him pretty straightforwardly. So I really go. That's the last hand. So I really hope you guys are able to take some of these concepts, put them into context. These hands are very simple, more or less, in terms of how to play them. But I really want you guys to start thinking every single time that you guys go in for a raise, why am I playing this hand? Or why am I calling this hand? Why am I folding this hand? I just realized that it's all going to come down to number one, position, number two, your hand strength, and then number three, every once in a while, your skill advantage is going to be a deciding factor. So, kind of figure out in your head why you're doing stuff, how much you should weigh a certain advantage. Always be thinking about it. Now, especially if you do what I recommend by going over the top three hands won and the top three hands lost every single session, you guys will start to see that a lot of your mistakes come pre-flop, or positions that you could have avoided post-flop if you had folded pre-flop, just by understanding the whole concepts of having advantages. And as you guys saw, all these hands were just like winning hands that I played fairly recently. So you can kind of see the type of hands where I'm winning stacks are really solid hands where I'm in position. So just understand where the money in poker comes from. It doesn't necessarily come from like outplaying people with deuce four suited, even though I did do that. Like almost every single hand was me having like a nutted hand in position and just value owning people, and that's literally what the micro stakes are. It's so ridiculously easy. Now here and there you can exploit some edges by like opening king two suited heads up and then like raising people that have a really wide donk range and just goofy stuff like that. But I can guarantee you this is not how I make most of my money. This is probably only a fraction of it. Most of my winnings come from just playing very solid, strong hands in position. And I'm pretty sure my opponents really hate me for it too, because it's really hard to play against players who just always play in position against you and always have very strong hands. So I hope that you guys learned something from this, and I hope that you can take away not only these theories, but be able to apply it as well. If you guys like this, go ahead and check out my blog over at nitrig.com. I have a lot more strategy there. I come out with content pretty frequently. Also check out my YouTube page if you're not already there. If you have any questions, comments, concerns, anything, go ahead and post in the comments section below. Also, I have a fairly new Twitter page over at twitter.com/nitregpoker. Alright guys, thanks for watching, and I'll see you later.